He loved fluffy animals more than anything, so being reborn as a prince with the power of summoning felt like destiny. In this new world, every creature he imagines can become real, and his only mission from the goddess is simple: spread the summoning skill and enjoy a peaceful, fluffy life. Cute, powerful, loyal, all born from his heart. But even a soft world gets wild when magic answers your every thought. Can a man build a paradise with magic and fluff alone? Let's find out. This story begins with the protagonist thinking about how much he loved furry animals. Maybe, in this world, he dreamed of being surrounded by them his whole life. His wish might come true. The beginning was quite unexpected. Moonguard suddenly appeared in the animal corner and congratulated him on winning a ticket to another world. He exclaimed in surprise. What? He wondered what kind of beauty was talking to him? To him, who didn't even have a friend. And besides, he'd never dated a girl in his entire life. How did she know about his secret corner with furry animals, where he visited every day after university? He grabbed the cat and asked the girl in surprise, "Is she here for them too?" "Here, she can hold this fluffy beauty." Moonguard replied, "No, she's not here for that. Here, let him take it." She handed him a ticket to another world. It was a special offer. He stared at it in amazement. The girl had said she hoped they would see each other again. At that moment, she disappeared, and he was swept away in a dark whirlwind. The protagonist, frightened, wondered what was going on. Suddenly, he realized he had heard a child crying, and everything around him was bright. Where was he? He seemed to see a copy of himself as a baby, held in Maria's arms. The woman asked him with a smile, "What's the matter, Prince Rufus?" MC was amazed. Was that him crying? He thought, "Dear Mom and Dad in heaven." He suddenly found himself in another world. This was Moonguard, a world where real swords and magic exist, and it turned out he wasn't just a nobleman, but a real prince. So that's what that special offer phrase meant. He was now Rufus Elidoria, the third prince of the kingdom of Elidoria. As he grew older, his cuteness was admired by everyone, especially his nannies and maids. Realizing the situation, he tried not to reveal himself and continued to pretend to be a baby. By the age of 7, he had grown considerably. When a child reaches 7, they participate in a ritual of skill transfer. Which skill will be passed on will only be revealed during the ceremony. 2 of his brothers, Gilliam, the first prince, and Leonard, the second prince, came to support him. Gilliam asked him if he was nervous. The protagonist admitted he was a little. Everyone was curious about which skill he would inherit. Leonard noted that they had been nervous too. The brothers took him by the hands and pulled him along, saying it was time for them to go. Rufus protested, telling them to wait. He could go himself. The princes told him not to be shy. When they arrived at the sacred cathedral, the protagonist saw many children taking turns placing their hands on the magic crystal and learning their skills. MC noticed his father sitting on the throne and looked at him. He felt awkward, like he was at a parent-teacher conference. Finally, the priest announced his name and told him to place his hands on the crystal. When the protagonist did so, he felt the crystal vibrate and saw a bright light illuminate the object. The priest solemnly declared that His Highness Prince Rufus had obtained the summoning skill. Everyone present joyfully congratulated him. He thought this was an overreaction. Summoning meant summoning magic, didn't it? Was that really such an important skill? His vivid imagination conjured up images of various demons, and he dreaded the thought that such monsters wouldn't appear. After all, if they did, he would hardly be able to handle them. He would rather be a trainer and live among furry animals than mess around with such monsters. Leonard told him he had obtained a rare skill. The protagonist thought, so it must be rare too. He asked his brothers, what did this summoning skill mean? Gilliam told him he'd better find out all the details from the Summoners Guild. It was a research organization, a guild that studied undiscovered skills. In their country, only a few people possessed this ability. As far as he remembered, there were only 2 people in this guild. When the brothers brought him there, he looked at the large building in surprise and asked them if this was it. The brothers told him yes, and knocked on the door. Sebastian told them to wait a moment. When he allowed them to enter, he bowed politely to the brothers and told Rufus that his father had already notified him of his arrival. He introduced himself, adding that he was the head of the Summoners Guild. Lara, his assistant, stood next to him. The girl bowed shyly to the protagonist and told him her name. He thought about it and understood. There really were only 2 people here. MC apologized to Serbus for disturbing him, but could he please explain his skill in more detail? The man said he'd be happy to do so, and asked him to go to the library. As they entered, the protagonist surveyed the modest furnishings of the room, with 2 bookcases full of books and a single table, and thought, this place can't really be called a library. Serbus picked up a book from the shelf and handed it to the protagonist. Rufus glanced at it and thought it was a picture book. He turned to the guild leader and asked if this was it. The man replied, exactly. This book isn't about animals and monsters. They call them magical creatures. The protagonist repeated in surprise, magical creatures? Serbus said, these creatures aren't even described in the illustrated reference books in the Royal Library. MC couldn't believe it. Could he really only summon these creatures? There were fewer species here than he expected. It seemed like a useless skill. He asked the leader if he could watch him use the summoning. Serbus turned to Lara, and the girl happily accepted his request. She assumed a stance, closed her eyes, extended her hands, and said, she, Lara, commands, let the marmot come. The MC apprehensively hoped nothing terrible would appear. Suddenly, a golden glow appeared right in front of her, and a creature very similar to a marmot appeared in space. The protagonist was delighted. It was a fluffy animal. He excitedly asked Lara if she could summon anyone else. The girl apologized to him and said that was all she could summon. Cerberus noted that he could do that too. The protagonist happily declared, "I want to see it." The man performed the same manipulations as Lara and summoned the Bardon. Suddenly, a small fluffy bird appeared on his shoulder. Rufus was absolutely delighted. The pet was also very fluffy. He asked the man if he could touch this cute creature too. The leader removed the bird from his shoulder, placed it on his finger, and handed it to the protagonist. He said that in order to summon a magical creature using the summoning skill, one must mentally imagine its appearance. Only when the image is clearly formed can he summon the magical creature. The protagonist, looking at the chick, noted how calm it was. So that's it. He needs to visualize everything in detail. First, he would like to try summoning the Bardon. This creature, summoned by Cerberus, had the shape and coloring of his pet siskin P, which he once kept, and now he hoped that all was well with his friend there. He took a stance, extended his hand, closed his eyes, and said, "I command, let the Bardon come." At that very moment, a bird appeared in his hand. The protagonist couldn't believe it. He succeeded on the first try. Suddenly, the fledgling flapped its wings and said, "He's here." Cerberus and Lara were amazed. "He's talking?" The protagonist was in shock himself. He'd summoned a talking Bardon? Judging by the reaction of the leader and his assistant, the summoned magical creature speaking was a complete surprise. Rufus smiled and told the feathered pet, "It's nice to meet you." He didn't understand why it was speaking. He'd often dreamed of talking to furry creatures, but that remained just a dream. Maybe, if the image was detailed enough, he could summon creatures not described in that book. Then, if he could summon anything, why not give it a try? MC took a stance, closed his eyes, and thought, he wants a big, cute creature. A white, fluffy animal with white feathers, red eyes, wielding powerful magic, the most powerful monster. Basically, he chooses a dragon. Of course, in his opinion, this confused him. He was a student after all, and there were too many things going on. Cerberus and Lara watched the protagonist's thoughts and behavior in amazement. His thoughts raced. So what? Should he summon some kid, someone else? The leader called his name apprehensively. The protagonist, imagining himself a professor, mentally slammed his hammer on the table and exclaimed, "Quiet. If these are the thoughts of a 7-year-old, there's nothing to be ashamed of." He thought, "Yes, everything's fine." MC concentrated and summoned a red-eyed, white-feathered dragon. Then he saw the surprised expressions of the leader and Lara, and he sheepishly wondered, did he really say that? He felt ashamed and covered his face with his hands. A stunned Cerberus addressed him, with Lara and the protagonist's brothers standing next to him, equally astonished. Rufus opened his eyes and thought he'd lost his mind. A huge creature with red eyes and white feathers lay quietly before him. He thought, dumbfounded. That was even better than he'd expected. He suddenly staggered. The guy supported him, calling him by name with alarm. The protagonist looked at his trembling hand and thought his strength was waning. Repeating the summons would be difficult. Lara, too, was completely at a loss, which wasn't surprising. At that moment, the dragon said, "It's cramped here. Can this creature break the wall?" The protagonist noted in amazement. "He's talking too?" Rufus hesitantly asked the creature if he could shrink a little. That was called an impossible request. Breaking the wall wasn't allowed. "Let it think of something." The dragon answered, "Then let him think of a name for it. Then it will belong to him, and he will be able to freely change its size at his command." MC was surprised, so he can keep it as a pet. He said then, he will name it Ragios. The dragon repeated its new name, adding that it sounded good. At that moment, a chick flew up to the protagonist and squeaked. The protagonist turned to Ragios and asked it if it could shrink to the size of pie. The dragon answered him, he will try. He was enveloped in a white cloud, and when the smoke cleared, Ragios returned to his small size. Rufus was completely delighted. The dragon began to look too cute, like a puppy, and most importantly, he was very fluffy. He thought, this seems to be his maximum. The dragon suddenly began to tremble, smoke billowing from it. The protagonist exclaimed in surprise, "What? She couldn't fulfill his order?" Ragios answered him, "He will disappear now." MC exclaimed with alarm, "Let him wait a little. A puppy's size is enough. It's a very good size." The dragon asked him, "Is this true?" MC wiped his sweaty forehead from the tension and thought, he seemed a bit too devoted. This was dangerous. He wanted to pick up this cute creature, so he asked the dragon if he could. The pet told him he didn't need to ask and jumped into his arms. The protagonist happily snuggled up to the fluffy creature and thought he was about to die of happiness. At that moment, he heard the astonished voice of the guild leader, who said, they never expected this. Summoning a magical creature that isn't listed in any reference book, and that even speaks human language, that's simply a miracle. They must report this to His Majesty immediately. The protagonist asked, who will report it? The leader and his assistant looked at him in confusion, not understanding the purpose of this question. Sometime later, the protagonist knocked on his father's door, told him it was him, and asked permission to enter. Upon entering, he addressed the king and announced that an emergency had arisen. He was rushing to inform him. His father asked what was wrong. Rufus told him he had just used his summoning skill. He summoned Ragios, a red-eyed, white-feathered dragon, which he held in his arms. At that moment, Pi flew above the protagonist's head and squeaked that he was there. The king, surprised, asked his son again, a red-eyed dragon? MC added, and on his shoulder sat another creature he had summoned, a Bardon named Pi. He told his pets to greet the king. Ragios turned to his master and said, please allow him to introduce himself to his father. It is a great honor for him. The king was amazed. Pi also spoke up. Regios continued. He wants to warn His Majesty right away. If he harms his master Rufus, he will be shown no mercy, even if he is his father. Pi spoke up. He's here. The king felt like he was going crazy. Too much information. He turned to his son and asked him to explain everything in detail. After the protagonist explained everything in detail, His Majesty gasped in amazement. It can't be. He'd summoned a magical creature, of which there are no records, and how did he manage it? The protagonist answered, explaining that he needed to clearly visualize the image. His father was perplexed. So he summoned a dragon? Rufus laughed and looked at his newfound companion. Regios suddenly reared up, grew larger, and told the king. He just told him. He will show no mercy if he harms his master. The king simply turned pale with fear. The dragon returned to its small size, climbed onto the king's head, and began biting him. The protagonist angrily told his pet to stop biting. The pet immediately left His Majesty's side and apologized to its master. The father, rubbing his bitten head, turned to his son and announced that he was appointing him head of the Summoners Guild. The protagonist exclaimed in surprise, "What? Isn't Service the guild head?" The king replied that he had already appointed him as deputy. He had told him so ever since his son, had gained power. Regios and his team were undoubtedly of great value. A report must be prepared on this matter. From now on, let him submit reports on magical creatures promptly and responsibly. Also, let him convey to the dragon that he bears no hostility. Rufus joyfully exclaimed that he understood. Leaving his father's quarters, MC thought, what a mess they've made. But he was allowed to keep Regios and Pi. Keeping pets isn't common in this world. When he first heard about it, he nearly died of shock. Now he could legally create his own furry paradise. He even cried with happiness, which the dragon immediately noticed. At that moment, MC heard Milia call out to him. She asked her son with a smile, did he have any business with his father? The protagonist replied that he did, that he needed a report. She noticed his animals and asked him what kind of babies they were. The protagonist told her they were a red-eyed, white-feathered dragon, Regios, and a bardon named Pi. The hatchling chirped in confirmation, and the dragon said she should remember it. The woman turned pale and staggered. Rufus called out to him anxiously, and she whispered, "Dragon," and fainted. Sometime later, Rufus sat by his mother's bed, still unconscious, and thought about how he'd never imagined she'd lose consciousness so suddenly. She didn't usually see things like that. She must have overreacted to magical creatures. He left Milius's bedroom and heard his brothers call out to him. Leonard spoke in surprise. He'd heard their father call him about magical creatures. The brothers noticed the protagonist's animals and exclaimed, "What are they?" Rufus told them they were magical creatures he'd summoned. Gilliam excitedly asked him if he could touch them. The protagonist handed his pets over to his older brother, smiling as he watched him handle them, thinking it was as expected of a scholar's skills. Leonard asked him if the dragon was dangerous. He told him it wouldn't attack until he gave the order. His brother noticed something was troubling him. Meanwhile, Regios was dodging Gilliam's cooing. He didn't like being squeezed like that. The protagonist asked Gilliam if everything was all right. He thought the dragon looked displeased. His brother, with an admiring look, asked him to tell him everything in detail. Sometime later, the protagonist returned to his room, said he was so tired that night, and went to bed. His pets settled down next to their master. He wished them good night and fell fast asleep. Suddenly, it was as if someone had woken him. It was very bright all around. He rubbed his eyes, wondering where he was. Moonguard told him they hadn't seen each other in a while. He exclaimed in amazement. It was she who had given him that very ticket to another world. The girl said, "That's right, she is the creator of this world." The protagonist asked her in surprise. "The creator?" She continued. She had granted his soul, departing from Earth, the rebirth into Moonguard. MC asked her, perplexed, what she was talking about. The girl solemnly declared that from now on, he must make sure everyone knew about the summoning skill. He wondered, surprised. "So everyone knows?" She asked him if he agreed to take this on. The protagonist exclaimed in confusion, "I don't understand anything. Let her explain everything to him in more detail." Moonguard asked him if she really had to explain everything. Looking at his lost expression, she said, "Okay, she'll do it." She said, in the tone of a stern teacher, "Listen carefully. In this world, the summoning skill has a special status. Here, expended energy is not replenished. It disappears completely upon use." The girl illustrated her words with pictures on the blackboard. Rufus asked her in surprise, "So how do you replenish it then?" He was intrigued by the picture. She told him that it requires the summoning skill. Using summoned magical creatures, she transfers magical energy to Moonguard. MC, looking at the pictures, thought that he understood. The explanation seemed to be dragging on. The girl continued, "He probably knows that this skill is passed on to a select few. Since almost no one in modern Moonguard is familiar with this ability, the number of those who can obtain it isn't increasing," the protagonist said for her. She looked at him in surprise and pronounced it, "It's all correct." During the skill transfer ceremony, a person receives the exact skill they desire. So, he obtained his skill because he has an inordinate love for all animals. The protagonist noted the word inordinate with surprise. The girl explained that her invitation of Earthlings to this world stemmed from rumors of their rich imagination, and it turned out to be the right decision. Incidentally, Having obtained this skill, he also gained the ability to use magic. The protagonist exclaimed in amazement. Magic? The girl continued. Magic is divided into combat, healing, strengthening, and everyday magic. Rufus exclaimed in admiration. He could use magic? It was just a dream. Suddenly he felt a sudden urge to get down to business. She looked at him sternly and suggested he return to the main topic. He asked her if a god couldn't send this magical power himself, without the mediation of magical creatures. The girl told him that it was possible, but then not even the smallest blade of grass would remain in this world. Great natural phenomena would destroy everything. She liked the human inhabitants of this world, but if magic dried up, this place would turn into a desert where not a single living creature could survive. Therefore, she asked him to use his imagination, drawing on his exceptional love for animals. Let him spread his summoning skills, using as many of his abilities as possible. He mentally formulated a plan. By using the skill, the number of magical creatures would increase, the skill would spread, and a fluffy paradise could be created. The protagonist responded with admiration. He understood everything. Let her rely on him. The girl looked at him attentively with a smile and said that she was glad she had chosen him. Then, she left it to him. He thought in confusion. This image seemed familiar. Was he falling again? Opening his eyes, he realized he was in his bed. The protagonist yawned and said, "Was it really a dream?" Ragios answered, "It wasn't a dream." MC called out to him in amazement. The dragon continued. His creator had conveyed his orders not to break his promise under any circumstances. Rufus thought in surprise. It wasn't a dream. He asked his friend, "Where is Pi?" Ragios answered, "The chick has returned." MC asked in confusion, "He's back? What about him?" The dragon answered, "He was being used as a cuddle toy." Rufus said sadly, "He must have treated Pi badly." The pet told him to just summon it again. The protagonist happily seized on this idea and summoned Pi. When the Barden appeared, it squeaked joyfully and said, "May the Lord forgive him for the wait." The protagonist noted his words had changed, but oh well. The main thing was that they were together again. Ragios asked him what their plans were for today. The protagonist replied that he was thinking of introducing them to someone today. The pet looked surprised. Introducing them? A little later, they arrived at the Elidorian Knights training grounds. The protagonist wanted to introduce everyone to his new friends. Everyone looked at them in surprise. Rufus said to his friends, "Are they seeing this? They're so cute, they can't take their eyes off them." The dragon remarked, "Maybe it was more negative attention?" Leonard asked his younger brother. "He came to train?" "That's right." MC told his pets that both Leonard and Gilliam had undergone a very serious training session. The middle brother exclaimed, "It was so fun at first." At that moment, Gilliam approached them with a smile and said, "They're chatting so happily, he'll join them." Leonard replied, "Nothing interesting," and ran off to train. The protagonist asked his older brother if he inherited the skill, then he could use magic, right? Gilliam answered that it was true. The protagonist then said, well, he wants to know what kind of magic he can use. The older brother was very surprised by this. He asked him if he hadn't learned about this at the guild. Rufus admitted that he hadn't yet. The first prince said, "I see. Then, they can try here. There's plenty of room." MC happily agreed to his proposal. Gilliam said, "They'll start with something simpler." He activated the light and explained to his younger brother that it was everyday magic that illuminates the way. It's ideal for training since anyone can master it. Rufus, surprised, said, "I'll try it now." He extended his hand and summoned light magic, but it didn't work. He repeated the summoning several times, but all attempts were unsuccessful. The protagonist frustratedly wondered why he couldn't do it. Gilliam asked him if everything was okay. He needed to concentrate magical energy in his palm and then cast the spell. MC tried again, strictly following his brother's advice, and a light lit up his palm. His delight knew no bounds. He asked his brother to tell him more about it. Gilliam agreed. After all this, the protagonist thought he had a bad feeling about this. After some time, after unsuccessful attempts at using other magic, Rufus thought sadly, this is a complete disaster. Are they serious? Is his magical life already over? Gilliam told him not to lose heart. After some time, the protagonist summoned Cerbus and Lara and told them he needed to ask them both something. What magic can he use once he has acquired the summoning skill? Both looked at him in amazement. Then Cerbus answered him that people with the summoning skill cannot use magic. The protagonist, almost in tears, thought, I see, it's over. He remembered Gilliam's words. If those around him knew how to use magic, then there would be no problem. He thought he was looking forward to it. Suddenly, a thought occurred to him, and he chuckled softly. Cerbus asked him, perplexed, if he was okay. MC said he had a great idea. Let them listen to him. If they couldn't use magic themselves, then let magical creatures do it. Cerbus and Lara looked at him in confusion, not understanding what he was talking about. Rufus, looking at the candles, thought, if this was magic that created fire for illumination, then they needed a magical creature that could manipulate fire. So, what magical creature was in that reference book picture? He remembered it was a salamander. The protagonist quickly summoned this creature, and in the blink of an eye, the salamander Kain appeared before him, addressed him respectfully, and said that he was deeply touched by his summoning. The protagonist scooped him up and exclaimed admiringly, he's so cute! He's charming in his own way, completely different from Ragios and Pi. Lara asked him in amazement, isn't he hot? MC replied, not at all. Cyan replied, of course he's not hot. He's not attacking right now. Rufus said, okay, how about he set something on fire as an experiment? He placed a plate of paper in front of a salamander. Cyan replied, okay, and fulfilled his request. The protagonist was shocked and exclaimed, this is amazing. Cyan said pompously, He's infinitely grateful for the praise. The protagonist thought since he can't use magic himself, he'll do it through summoning. Cerbus, deeply impressed by the protagonist's abilities, turned to him and said he was very impressed. The man added that all this time he'd been limiting himself, never considering the full potential of the summoning skill. And who would have thought this skill could be used like this? Lara exclaimed. The same could be said about her. Rufus approached them and told them to raise their heads. Together, they would tell the world about the benefits of the summoning skill. So, they needed to work together. Both Cerbus and Lara happily accepted his offer, and they would all be acquainted with Cain. Salamander asked him, "Is that his name now?" The protagonist answered, "Yes, does he like it?" Cain replied, "I like it very much." At that moment, the brothers and Milia stood outside the door, listening to their conversation. The protagonist asked the salamander what the limit of his fire was. Cain answered, he still had plenty of power. Rufus thought, okay, since the opportunity presented itself, why not try everything? He laughingly suggested to his new friend that perhaps they should set everything ablaze with a vengeance. Salamander readily agreed. The protagonist told him he was joking. At that moment, his brothers and mother entered the room. Milia, astonished, called out his name and asked, "What did he just say? What's going on here?" The protagonist, confused, wondered what to do now. As soon as she appeared, everything turned into a nightmare. Milia looked at the salamander and asked her son, "Who is this little one?" The protagonist replied, "It's a new creature he summoned, a salamander named Cain." She exclaimed in fear, "A lizard," and fainted again. Rufus called out to her in alarm, thinking something was wrong. As he'd expected, she reacted violently again. This time the woman quickly recovered and told the children everything was fine and not to worry. She approached MC, apologized, and asked him to introduce her to his pets. The protagonist looked at her warily, as she'd also fainted yesterday. Milia said she hadn't been able to greet them yesterday, and she'd been worried about it for a long time. He turned to his friends and asked them to introduce themselves to his mother. They told her their names one by one, which left her even more amazed. She exclaimed, "Are they even talking?" She asked her son if she could pet them. The protagonist replied, "Of course." Rajos pompously told his master that since she was his mother, he could not be against being petted. When the woman touched the dragon, she exclaimed in surprise, "He's so fluffy." Pai perched on her hand, and she gently stroked his feathers. Looking at Cyan, Milia said to him with a smile. Now she saw that he had a very sweet face. "She apologizes for being scared." The salamander addressed her as his master's mother, and assured her that everything was fine, and she didn't need to apologize. She asked them to get along with her son, Rufus. MC was surprised. He hadn't expected her to actually come by just to say hello. At that moment, Lara let out a frightened cry. Cyan apologized to the girl and asked if she was okay. The protagonist wondered if Lara was really afraid of salamanders. With that look, she wouldn't even be able to summon anything, let alone observe. It would be good to be able to use fire. At that moment, he heard Lara remark in surprise, "Wow." He looked in her direction and saw Pai perched on a stack of books, flaunting his power with his wings. The protagonist thought maybe if it were a bird, it would work. Without thinking twice, he summoned the firebird. Contrary to his expectations, a small chick appeared before him. Rufus exhaled and thought he was so cute, but his charm was different from Pai's. He really was a genius. And his furry pats were simply brilliant too. The chick chirped and a small flame erupted from its beak. The protagonist asked Lara how she liked this pet. The girl, surprised, asked him, "This little one?" She picked it up and Rufus said, "It's the firebird's chick." The girl looked at the fluffy baby and said, perhaps she could even summon it. Sometime later, when the protagonist arrived at the library, he found Cerbus there. The man was looking at a book. He asked him what he was doing. The former guild leader answered him with a smile, saying that since the number of magical creatures was increasing, he believed a new reference book would be necessary for compiling reports. The protagonist marveled, thinking, "This is just what we need." He called out to Balto and asked if he could draw. The boy replied that he couldn't. The protagonist called out to Lara and asked if she could draw. Seeing her poor drawing of a bird, he thought, it looks like he'll have to do everything himself. MC tried drawing Cayenne, but the pet itself told him it looked terrible. Cerbus suggested he entrust the job to the court artist. The protagonist sighed and remarked, "It's a shame it turned out this way." Suddenly he exclaimed, "Exactly. After all, you can summon a bear artist." Rufus immediately set to work, and in the blink of an eye, a huge bear appeared. The protagonist hugged him and said that from now on, his name will be Beard. He added, "Now let him show us what he's made of. Let him try drawing Rajios." Beard instantly drew an incredibly beautiful portrait and showed it to him. MC exclaimed in amazement, "That can't be right." Cerbus, equally surprised, noted that even a court artist would envy such speed and skill. The protagonist asked the bear if he could draw in a different style. Beard instantly drew an ugly face. Lara, looking at the portrait, asked in bewilderment, "Is that really her?" Her expression expressed such astonishment that Rufus burst out laughing. Suddenly, the king entered the room and told his son that he had heard everything. His Majesty looked at the animals and remarked that it seemed to him there were a few more of them. MC excitedly said, "Let everyone say hello to his father." The man excitedly exclaimed that everything was fine. Let him leave everything as it was, but let him sit quietly for a while. After that, they went out into the corridor. The protagonist remembered his father's words and noted that he shouldn't have protested so forcefully. Suddenly, he had a lot of free time. He didn't want to disturb Cerbus and Lara, so they went out. Rufus offered to show his furry friends around the mansion. Ragios wondered if that wouldn't attract even more attention. The protagonist agreed and thought about whether simply sitting in the room wasn't an option either. He remembered his brother Leonard telling him how he explored the mansion's basement and found something there. So, they were going to the basement. MC started talking inside his head while his father had just ordered him to sit still. But there could be something incredible down there. Gold and silver treasures, and what if they found a door to a new world? If they got caught, they were all doomed. Didn't he understand the risks? Was he seriously considering a life without adventure after being reincarnated in another world? Conclusion: they were going to the basement. After these thoughts, the protagonist led his charges to the right place. Ragios inquired where exactly this basement was. He replied that he believed it was in an area accessible only to the royal family. If he was not mistaken, Brother Leonard had mentioned some ancient black door. They came to a huge black door, and Ragios asked him if that was the door. MC impatiently exclaimed, "What's in there?" He wished this journey had been worth it. After they entered the basement, Rufus sensed something was wrong. Suddenly, a headless horseman appeared before them. The protagonist became lost in thought. Having disobeyed his father's orders, unable to sit still, he and his friends found themselves in great danger. A few hours earlier, they had entered the basement and begun exploring. He noticed that, as expected, it was pitch dark. Ragios motioned for him to watch his step. The protagonist said the darkness wouldn't be a problem, since they had cayenne. Salamander lit a candle, and the allies continued on their way. Looking around, MC considered the thought. They'd gone so deep, and yet here it was empty. Brother Leonard spoke so seriously that it was hardly a joke, but still. Suddenly, a metal grate slammed shut behind him. He exclaimed in confusion. Why had it closed so suddenly? Ragios called out to him at the last moment, warning him of danger. The protagonist turned and saw a headless horseman preparing to strike. He dodged at the last moment and fearfully wondered, was that the headless knight Dullahan? What was he doing in the castle basement? No, maybe some kind of defense system had activated. Since there was a door there, too, then most likely, defeating this enemy would allow them to advance. They needed to get out of here quickly. He stared at Dullahan, mesmerized, dreading her attack. Suddenly, Leonard and Gilliam approached him. The middle brother, smiling, asked him what he was doing here. It was too bad he hadn't invited them either. MC saw the brothers and was overjoyed. The eldest brother leaned over and remarked that he'd been watching him for a reason. Entering the basement was forbidden without permission. There was a multi-level security system in place, and once activated, escaping would be difficult. Leonard, smiling, said that if their father found out, he'd be finished. But first, they needed to deal with the enemy. He instantly dodged the enemy's attack and noted with a smile that they hadn't seen each other in a while. The protagonist, surprised, asked if he'd fought him before. Leonard replied that he'd been about his age back then, and they'd had a hard time that time. How was he doing here now? The second prince cut down the enemy with lightning speed and sheathed his sword. The protagonist was in shock. His brother's movements were so fast that he didn't have time to see anything. Leonard noted with a smile that he had somehow become weaker since last time. Rufus said admiringly, "Now that's what he calls a holy sword skill." Suddenly the door opened, and a gargoyle appeared before them. MC noted with alarm that gargoyles were monsters, no less powerful than Dullahan. Gilliam considered this as a chance to show Rufus what he was capable of. He told them with a smile that he would take it upon himself. In an instant, the first prince used his magic and incinerated the monster, then paused to consider how sloppy it had been. Leonard smiled and remarked that he had done an excellent job. MC considered this, thinking that while he knew the brothers were strong, he was nowhere near their strength. He also constantly needed protection. After killing the gargoyle, the next room opened. They entered, and an army of horsemen and gargoyles appeared before them. The protagonist was frightened to think that both were now here. Why were there so many of them? He sheepishly asked them to deal with them. Leonard, smiling, grabbed his shoulder and said that a man should always be prepared for battle. The protagonist replied that he couldn't use a sword or magic. The second prince said that he could do it. He was their brother. Ragios pointed out that he was right. He could fight, just like his brothers, but let him give the order. He wouldn't repeat it a second time. MC pointed his finger at the monsters and ordered him to deal with them. Ragios incinerated the monster in an instant and asked his master, "Is that all?" But he was just getting into the swing of things. Leonard noted that this wasn't the end. The protagonist summoned the other creatures and ordered them to do their best. They pounced on the monsters and began to destroy them. A moment later, his pets returned and reported that they were finished. Leonard remarked that even he hadn't gone this far yet. After the battle, another iron gate opened. They stepped inside and found themselves in a bright square. MC thought that even if it was a square, it was only walls and a pedestal. Gilliam approached the structure and noticed that the pedestal had a special mechanism. He cut his finger, causing blood to drip. The protagonist ran up to him excitedly and exclaimed in alarm, "I'm bleeding!" The boy replied with a smile that everything was fine. The wound would heal. He should look at the wall ahead. A moment later, a secret door opened. Gilliam explained with a smile that this door could only be opened with royal blood. The protagonist was surprised to realize that no one but the royal family could enter. He asked his older brother what was inside. The prince told him to go inside and he would understand everything immediately. MC entered and saw a multitude of treasures. He exclaimed in amazement, "It's amazing. there really was a hidden treasure cache hidden there. Gilliam explained that since the basement was so strong, it was used as a warehouse for storing supplies in case of emergency. The protagonist asked him if everyone knew about it. Leonard replied that the whole family knew, but he only just learned about it. Rufus considered this. Did inheriting the skill mean he was being declared part of the royal family? Suddenly, Regios stared thoughtfully at the wall. MC noticed this and asked him what had happened. The dragon replied that he sensed a powerful ally behind the wall. The protagonist, surprised, asked if it really was a magical creature. Gilliam tapped the wall with his finger and noticed that there seemed to be space in the depths, but even he couldn't destroy it. The protagonist approached the wall and lightly touched it, revealing a secret passage. Suddenly, they were met by a talking chest, which menacingly asked them who dared interrupt his sleep. The creature laughed and said it was just a joke. He always wanted to try it. Gilliam asked with a smile, "Is the talking chest a trap?" Leonard asked. "It's so suspicious. Maybe he should take it apart?" The creature was scared by this, asked not to do it, and said that he would not harm them. Rufus looked at him and asked, was he alone here all this time? He agreed and said that he was looking for a new master here. They looked at each other for a few seconds, and he asked maybe he would become its master? He was surprised by this and asked then, should they make a contract? The chest agreed, and he thought, does this mean it already had a master before? He asked, what does he need to do for this? He said that he should just come up with a name for it. Leonard approached him and asked if he could come up with a name. He began to list the names he came up with, and he thought that it was not that simple. He turned around, called Ragios, and asked if he could become the master of magical creatures summoned by someone else. He agreed and said that it was possible to summon a creature that did not belong to this world. The protagonist looked at the chest and thought, so that's how it was. He must have been here alone for a very long time, unnoticed by anyone. Leonard, with a slightly dissatisfied look, said that he couldn't think of anything. The chest grinned and asked, was that true? He called his brother and asked if maybe this time he would come up with a name for him. He came closer and asked, had he been waiting all this time for someone to come? He agreed and asked if he was bored. The chest agreed and said that since he had nothing better to do anyway, he was thinking of a greeting for the next person. He, looking a little confused, began to come up with names using the word trap box and came up with the name Tora-chan. Suddenly, the chest began to emit a bright light, and he, with a worried look, wondered what kind of light it was. The light faded, and the chest said that the master's re-registration process was complete. He was now its slave. His brothers called him with displeasure, and he turned around and said loudly that he had not given it a name for that purpose. Magical creatures were his friends, and he was his friend too. Tora-chan laughed contentedly because of this, and he was surprised to think that he looked pleased. It turns out that the summoning skill allows you to summon not only animals, but also other magical creatures. He seemed to be daydreaming. Gilliam looked away and said that he had no idea that a secret room could be hidden here. Could it really be hiding something? He approached it and asked with a friendly look what it had inside. Tora-chan said that he had a lot of things. Leonard came up and said that he asked him to show a few things. He refused, citing the fact that he was not his master, which is why he loudly asked, what is this detachment? MC approached him, called him by name, and politely asked to see what was inside. He agreed, and took out a variety of weapons and other things that fell to the ground. They were all surprised by this, and he wondered what it was. Maybe he had a four-dimensional space there? He examined these things, and said that there was a whole bunch of weapons here that he had never seen before. Leonard picked up a slipper and asked if this could really be called a weapon. Perhaps the things here are more valuable than in their treasury. Tora-chan laughed and said that they could continue praising him. Rufus's attention was drawn to a strange short object lying on the ground, and he asked what it was. He found it familiar, pressed the button, which caused a beam of light to shoot out of the handle. He immediately turned it off, threw it away, and said that it seemed like a weapon from the very distant past. He wiped the sweat from his forehead and thought that this was dangerous. His view of the world almost collapsed. It would be better for him to look for a simpler weapon. He took the huge sword and thought with a slightly worried look that it was such an ancient sword, just like from a museum. He should try swinging it. Leonard looked at him, was about to say something, but at that moment he swung the sword he had just taken. He released a powerful wave of energy that left a large cut on the wall. He was very surprised by what happened and asked loudly, what kind of sword was that? Gilliam called his name and worriedly asked if everything was okay with him. He turned around and said loudly that he was fine, but there was the wall. Leonard stood nearby, looked at it and asked, is that really it? The protagonist turned to him and asked if he really knew what kind of sword it was. He remembered what it was and said that it was Excalibur. He was shocked by this and thought, does that mean he was holding a holy sword in his hands? He took the sword, rubbed his cheek, and said that judging by the light, it was undoubtedly the holy sword Excalibur. He couldn't believe that the day had come when he could see it. Ragios looked at it with a smirk and said that it was similar to the way he looked at them. This was to be expected from his brother. He was surprised by what he heard and asked loudly if he really looked like that from the outside. Leonard put his hand on his shoulder, called his name, and asked if he could take it. He said in a confused tone that it would be a shame if such a treasure were to go to waste. He was very happy about this and thanked him. He thought with a slightly displeased look that he had seen the worst side of his tough brother. Gilliam approached them and said that it was time for them to return. After that, they came to the palace, and he said that for now, they would not tell anyone about this treasure in the basement. Leonard asked, so they would keep it a secret? They turned around with a surprised look, and were very surprised when they saw their father approaching them. He asked with a frighteningly serious look, "Did they just come out of the basement? What was that noise there?" They were all worried about what happened and thought that their secret was out. Their father, called Leonard, was about to say something about his sword, and he happily said that he should take a look at it. He took the sword out of its sheath and with an incredibly happy look said that it was the holy sword Excalibur. The brothers were incredibly shocked because of how carelessly he told it. He called them all by name in a serious tone and said that they should follow him and he would listen to their story. MC, called Tora-chan, said his name, and said that it seemed like one of their ancestors had the skill of summoning, so he summoned him. Their father asked if he had any other weapons inside him. He turned to him and asked what he could say about it. He said in a calm voice that he had everything. This caught his attention, and he decided to ask the first thing that came to his mind. He asked what about the demonic sword Durandal, the sacred spear Gungnir, the magical spear Longinus. He was shocked that he had all of this, turned to his father and said that it was like that. He was very surprised by this and asked what that was even supposed to mean. He looked at Tora-chan and said that he really did have anything inside him. His father used his appraisal skill on the sword and said that it was hard to believe, but it was definitely the real Excalibur. However, are they allowed to enter the basement without permission? They all flinched from fear, and he said that since they broke the ban, the only thing left to do was punish them. He called his two eldest sons and said that he was instructing them both to make a list of all the weapons. They reacted to this punishment in completely different ways, but didn't dare object. Father said that using this list, Rufus should check if Tora-chan has all these weapons inside. He also had to return Excalibur. Leonard was very surprised by this and was about to ask something, but he repeated it with displeasure. The next day, the protagonist was walking down the hallway and asked, "So this is the place my father was talking about?" Of course, it's bad that his brothers were punished because of him. He should have been the only one punished. He entered the office, heard Leonard's voice, saw that he was lying on the table, and said that he should not give up. It's just ordinary paperwork after all. He's strong, you can't give up. Next to him, Gilliam was practicing with a sword and said loudly in a displeased voice that he really wanted to do all this. He looked at them with a worried look and thought that this was real hell. For him, with his scholarly skills, making lists is a real pleasure, and his father understood this, so he forbade him from participating. After some time, Leonard came up to him, called his name, and said they did it. MC took a very large stack of papers and said he did a good job. He continued practicing with his sword, looked at them, and said that he also wanted to participate in this. He, along with the summoned creatures, began to carry away the lists and thought that it was unbearable. He couldn't stand this atmosphere. Later, he came to another office and thanked them for helping him carry it. He called Tora-chan and asked if he could check the contents again. Having received consent, he said that he would name the weapons, and he would answer whether he had them or not. After some time, he said with a slightly tired look that they had finally finished with several items. He thought about something and asked if he had anything besides weapons and armor. He agreed and said, for example, magical artifacts. This caught his attention and he asked if he could get something like that. He agreed, after which he threw a small cube on the floor. He picked it up, began to examine it, accidentally pressed a button, and a very strong wind blew into it. He turned it off and asked if it might be some kind of fan. He agreed and said it was a wind box. He looked inside the box and asked if there was an emerald inside. Was that an energy source? What else did he have? Tora-chan said that there was muscle energy drink or nectar, for example. He was very surprised by this and caught the bottles that he had thrown away. Rufus asked, nectar? If his memory serves him correctly, is it a restorative elixir? He was very worried that this was something that shouldn't exist in this world and immediately said that he should quickly put it away. He thought for a moment and said that he also had weapons of mass destruction or something like that. He approached him with a serious expression and said that he was asking for it, but under no circumstances should he take it out. He was very worried about this and thought that all these were things that didn't exist in the current era. The ancestor who summoned him, I wonder what time period he was from. What if what's inside turns out to be a weapon from the era of an ancient civilization? They had been through this before, after all. A long time ago, the gods and demons fought, and at some point, as if having mutually destroyed each other, the gods and demons disappeared. The gods, being at a disadvantage, gave people weapons forged by the gods and made them their allies. After the gods were defeated, the remaining humans used this weapon to destroy the demons. He called Ragios and asked, I wonder if demons still exist? He asked with a smirk, who knows? He was a little surprised by this and said that means even he doesn't know. Although, even if they exist, it's not a problem for him. He looked at it with a slightly worried look and thought that he sees a destructive future. He called the owner and asked, by the way, his hands stopped. Is he finished already? He remembered this and returned to his duties. Later his father came to him, called him by name, and asked how the work was going. The protagonist turned to him and said that everything was going without a hitch. He walked up to the table and said that this was simply an incredible amount. He said that these were only the first few sheets so far, but everything was in stock. He took one of the documents and said that from now on he should choose several weapons from each sheet and check it. With such a volume, it would take too long. However, is everything that is stated here really there? After receiving confirmation, he said that under no circumstances should anything be taken out. He hasn't taken anything out yet, right? He agreed with this, and after a while finished checking all these weapons. He laid his head on the table and said that even in a child's body, sitting at work all day is tiring. He should go to the bath, but he doesn't even want to move. However, he wants to take a bath and plunge into a hot spring. I wonder if there is a hot spring culture in this world? By the way, he doesn't have any magical creatures of the water element yet, right? Maybe he can find a container the size of a bath? Ragios looked at him and asked what he was going to do. He didn't answer. Summoned Undine. She immediately appeared in front of him and asked, did he call her? He said with a happy expression on his face that he wanted to fill it with water. She said that she could create a hot spring. He was very surprised by what he heard and asked, is that really so? She extended her tentacles to the bucket in his hands and asked if she could borrow the container for a while. He allowed her, and she took it and filled it with water, which began to boil. She asked him to immerse his feet in it, and he did so, saying in a very satisfied tone that it was simply amazing. The fatigue in his body disappeared almost instantly. She asked if he liked it. It helped with stiff shoulders, lower back pain, and relieved fatigue. It was a source with a continuous supply of water that had a high effect on skin beauty. MC said that it was a real hot spring. His body seemed to have become lighter. Ragios approached the bucket, dipped his paw in, and asked if it was that good. His paw began to glow, and he said that it seemed to really have an effect. After that, he went out into the hallway and said that he wanted to try it in a more spacious bathtub. If only there were a bathtub in his room. He walked next to him and asked, but still, water with a skin beauty effect is mysterious. He turned to him, called his name, and said that it was his first time experiencing hot springs. Milia came up to him and asked what they had said about skin beauty. Could he tell her more about it? She noticed her next to him, called him and asked, is this little one new? He agreed and said that it was Udina Aqua. She called her mom and said that she was pleased to meet her. She came closer to her and said that her son really summons unusual creatures. Ragios said that she can create a hot spring with a high effect on skin beauty. This made her eyes light up with enthusiasm, and she asked what a hot spring is. He was a little surprised by this and said that it was a kind of bath. In addition to skin beauty, it has an effect against stiff shoulders, lower back pain, and relieves fatigue. Milia immediately said that they should try it right now. She grabbed his hand and ran very quickly down the corridor. They came to a large bathtub, and Rufus thought that she had deliberately drained the water that had been drawn earlier. She stood next to him and said with a happy look that he could begin. He called Aqua and asked if she could do it. She agreed and quickly filled the bathtub with hot water. Later, he was very surprised and asked loudly if he needed to come in too. She said that they were family, so it was natural. He didn't want to take a bath with his mother. He should take off his clothes quickly. He felt embarrassed about this and said loudly that he could manage on his own. After that, they sat in the bathtub together, and she said with surprise that her skin really became smooth as silk. He agreed and thought the women would be delighted. However, indeed, all her skin became smooth, like a baby's. He was still a child, so he didn't know what stiff shoulders or lower back pain were, but it seemed that the fatigue from work had suddenly evaporated. Right, what if we use this hot spring in the large bathhouse of the nightly order? Everyone would probably like this. Maybe we should try it on the brothers first? Milia said with a satisfied look that hot springs were amazing. However, she really loved taking baths, but drying her hair was a real hassle. He thought that there were no hair dryers in this world. If only wind magic could be used. He had an idea. He stood up abruptly and asked if she could wait a little. After a while, they got dressed. He said that on his behalf, he commanded the fairy to appear. At that moment, a fairy actually appeared next to him, called him darling, and greeted him. He said that this was the fairy Tia. He wanted her to dry his mother's hair with her magic. She agreed and said that it would be easy. She would give it a dazzling shine. She asked her not to move, after which she used magic, and Milia was very surprised because of the effect of this magic. The maids approached her, surprised by what had happened, and said that her hair had become incredibly beautiful. It was so shiny and fresh. She approached him, called him by name, and said that she really liked it, and the hot spring and the fairy wind. She would like to enjoy this every day. The protagonist was surprised by this, and thought that this is how he accepted his mother's order. After some time, Serba said that on his own behalf he ordered the salamander to appear. He managed to do this. He saw this, and joyfully said loudly that he finally learned how to summon the salamander. He looked at him and said that it was all thanks to the wonderful example of the guild leader. They looked to the side, and he said that it seemed that Lara had also made progress. She summoned the firebird, was very surprised and happy about this, and said that she had succeeded. She picked up the bird, called out loudly to the guild leader, and said that the summoning had finally succeeded. It was a firebird. The MC joyfully exclaimed that it was amazing. She was about to thank him, but she began to lose consciousness, which greatly worried him, and he loudly asked, "Is she okay?" She started to fall and said that she had been concentrating for so many hours. She sat down on the floor and said that at this pace she would learn to summon even more magical creatures. He said with a worried look that rest was also important. Service also approached her and asked if she could go out for some fresh air. She agreed and went to the exit, and they looked at her and wondered if she would be okay. In the hallway, she collided with someone and screamed loudly in surprise. They left the office and saw Lara kneeling in front of Milia and loudly asking for forgiveness from Her Majesty. She leaned towards her and asked, "She's from the Summoners Guild, right? What are those circles under her eyes?" She said in a very worried tone that she had been intensively training in summoning lately. Rufus ran to them and called for his mother. She called his name and politely told him that he should prepare the bath. If she's not mistaken, that water does relieve fatigue, right? He did this and thought that after that, rumors about the hot spring, which had quietly begun to gain popularity in a corner of the castle, spread among the servants, aristocrats, and even the knights. From person to person, rumors spread throughout the castle, and the scale and number of people grew. Thus, the situation got out of control and reached an unmanageable level. The number of people increased significantly. After that, his father called him by name with a displeased look and said that it was attracting too much attention. It seems he himself knows what he will say. When he inherited the summoning skill, he could not have imagined that everything would become so noisy. He himself will tell Milia not to open the hot spring anymore. The protagonist agreed and was about to go out, but he called him, asked him to wait, and said that he had one more thing. He has already matured. It seems the right time has come. It's time to get married. He was very surprised by this and thought with a displeased expression that he was actually only 7 years old. Isn't that too early? His father said that although he was saying this, it wasn't right now. He was referring to the conversation about what kind of attitude a member of the Elidorian royal family should have. He thought it was too confusing. Marriage, then? A royal marriage? Is it a political marriage, right? Even if he was suddenly told about it, it didn't feel real. He had been single in his past life too. But first of all, he had a mission to spread the summoning skill throughout the world. His father called him and asked if he was even listening to him. He agreed, and then left his father's office. He was hungry, and asked if he wondered if they would give him anything to eat if he went to the kitchen. By the way, speaking of food, magical creatures don't eat, right? Raggio said there was no particular need for that. MC asked with a tense look if he were to summon them by imagining them eating together. He thought that a barbecue outside with the whole company would definitely be fun. Perhaps he would ask the chef. He listened to his question and asked what barbecue was. He had never heard of it before. There are dishes where meat and vegetables are fried on a metal grill. He was glad when he heard this, agreed and said that this is exactly it. He said that, however, doing barbecue outside is dangerous, so it is not allowed. He was surprised by what he heard and asked why it was dangerous. He said that it is dangerous because there is a possibility that poison is added. He was very surprised by what he heard and thought that it is clear there is such a danger outside too. He asked then, what dishes are there that are fried on an iron stove? The chef thought about it and said that cookies and other pastries, probably. He began to think about this with a happy look, and he apologized to the master and said that animals are not allowed in the kitchen. He apologized, then went out into the corridor and said that in this world there are still very few sweets. If we talk about sweets that were on Earth, these are of course shupastries, dango with mitarashi sauce, baumkuchen, and pudding. He came into the room and loudly announced that Master Chef Tetsujin should appear. A robot appeared in front of him and he said that it was a magical creature that prepares food. Service and Lara were standing nearby and asked, "Is this a golem?" Rufus said that it was an iron golem. His name is Tetsujin. He asked him to make pudding, and he took out a piece of paper and wrote something on it. He looked at it, read it, and said that he did not have the ingredients and kitchen utensils. After that, he handed the list to Balto and asked if he could bring what was written here from the kitchen. He agreed and left the room, and he called Tora-chan and asked if there was an oven inside, something that could bake using a heat source inside the box or cook with steam. He asked if he was talking about a heating kitchen appliance. He agreed and said that he was asking to get it out. He took it out and he saw it and thought that it looked almost like a toaster oven, or rather, and the method of use is similar. He called him and asked if there were instructions for this heating appliance. He agreed, gave it to him, and he looked at it and wondered if this was ancient writing. He called Ragios and asked if he could read it. He denied it. He showed Torichan and asked what about him. He looked at it and said that first he should check if the magic crystal is charged with magic power. The protagonist was surprised by this and said that, as expected of him. He laughed happily and said that for him, it was as easy as pie. He approached the device and said that this was a magic crystal, the same as what was inside the box with the wind. Is it charged? He said that it was written there that when the color disappears, it should be replaced with a new one. He was surprised by what he heard and asked, what about the charger? He said that there is none. He has a lot of spare magic crystals. At that moment, Balto came to him, called the master, and said that he brought the food. He thanked him and asked if the chef said anything. He said that he asked about what he was going to make. He only answered that the master intended to cook something called pudding. He called Tetsujin and said that he could cook pudding. He went to the table and started waving his arms very quickly, and he looked at it and thought that it was too fast. It was completely unclear what he was doing. He finished cooking and Lara asked, "Is this hot food?" MC denied it and said that it was a dish that was cooled and it solidified. He thought that it would be good if he had cold magic. However, it must be difficult to maintain a constant temperature with magic. He called Torachan again and asked if he could get out the refrigerator. He didn't understand it and said that it was a box filled with cold air inside. Now he understood it, took it out, and said that it was a compact freezer. He looked at it in surprise and thought that no matter how you look at it, it was a refrigerator. After some time, he opened the refrigerator door and asked, "I wonder if it had cooled down yet." He took out a portion, decided to try it, and with a satisfied look said that it was exactly the taste. Lara also tried it. She really liked it and said that it was sweet and cool, and also very tender. Service also tried it and said that this means such food exists. Rufus took a spoonful of pudding, called Ragios, and asked if he wanted to try it. He ate it anyway, and said that until now he had never shown interest in food. However, pudding turned out to be so delicious. He thought that even if they didn't need food, it seemed that for Ragios and the others, it had become something of a favorite delicacy. He said that since that was the case, he would like his father and mother to try it too. However, if you just serve it like that, they are unlikely to eat it. Some natural way is needed. After some time, he and his family were sitting in the hall, and they said that today was also delicious, and they were grateful for it. They were served pudding for dessert. Melia was surprised when she saw it and said that she had never seen such a dessert. He thought with a satisfied grin that he had asked the chef to cook it according to the same recipe. Unexpectedly for him, he said that it was a dessert called pudding, the recipe for which the third prince kindly gave them. He thought that he had completely forgotten to ask the chef to keep quiet about it. His father looked at him ominously and took a deep breath. The protagonist, in a worried voice, loudly said that this was not true at all. It wasn't he who trained him, it was Chief Tetsujin, whom he summoned. The name caught his attention, and he immediately summoned the robot. A cloud of smoke appeared, from which it emerged, shining bright rays from its eyes. He looked at it with a puzzled expression and wondered if this was, by any chance, annihilation mode. His father called out to him in a frightened voice and said that he had to calm him down. Melia was very frightened when she saw this, calling it a fire golem and losing consciousness, which greatly worried Leonard. While all this was happening, Gilliam looked at the pudding, tried a little and said loudly that it was very tasty. "This is pudding." He didn't think that he would actually be able to taste what his ancestors ate. MC was surprised by this, called his brother and asked if he knew about this dish. He agreed, and at that moment she came to her senses and said that she must have imagined it. She thought she only saw a golem. She realized that she hadn't imagined it, and he returned Tetsujin to normal mode and introduced him again. He said that he wanted to try a sweet called pudding. He thought that it would be a shame for them to eat it alone, so he taught the chef. Gilliam, looking very happy, called his mother and said that pudding is a wonderful food. She calmed down a little, tried it, and said with surprise that it was really delicious. The rest of the family also tried it and agreed. They said that this delicate texture that melts and dissolves in the mouth is magnificent. The texture and taste give happiness. He thought with a slightly nervous smile that everyone was happy. It seems he was definitely forgiven. She said that, by the way, they say that Gilliam and Leonard were discussing an inspection trip. Where are they heading this time? He said with a smile that this time they are planning to inspect the Duchy of Flirt. Rufus listened to this and thought that if he was not mistaken, it was one of the 4 great duchies of the kingdom of Eladoria. He turned and asked, "Are there any problems in this duchy?" Leonard said that only between them, it seems their influence has weakened a little lately. He, as a Chen of the royal family, is going there to bolster their strength and at the same time shake them up. He understood this and said that the mere fact that a member of the royal family is personally visiting the Lord's residence will become a topic of conversation. He thought that if he demonstrated strong ties to the royal family, it would be a little easier to regain influence. If one of the 4 great duchies were to decline, it would create various problems. He remembered Moongard saying that he should spread the summoning skill and use it more. He called his brother, who turned to him and asked, "Is something wrong?" The protagonist asked if he could also go with them on this inspection. He was surprised by what he heard and asked, "Does he want to go on the inspection? Is there any reason for this?" He remembered her face and said that of course there was one. He wishes to spread the summoning skill. All the family members were a little surprised by this and looked at him. His father took a deep breath, looked at him with a calm expression and said that he knew that he was thinking a lot about the summoning skill. Although he often creates problems, it is to his credit that he showed everyone the usefulness of the summoning skill, which was still unclear. He called Leonard and said that he should take him with him on an inspection. He suddenly became very serious and said that, however, he must keep a very close eye on him. He agreed with a small smile and said that if this was the royal order, he would take him with him. He patted him on the head and said that he must obey him well. He looked at him with a happy expression and agreed with this. After some time, they left the castle, and he said that they were leaving for the duchy in a week. He handed him a document and said that this was the inspection schedule. It was planned for 7 days. MC, with a happy expression on his face, agreed, started reading it, and thought that finally he would leave the capital for the first time. Leonard said that the names of key people were written on this paper from top to bottom, so he should remember at least the top names. He looked at it more closely and thought, the key people of the duchy? It seemed there were quite a lot of them. Remembering them only by names would be difficult. He called him and asked if it was possible to learn more about these key people. He agreed with a nervous smile and said that he would answer as much as he could. He looked at him and thought that it seemed he didn't want him to ask too many questions. His brother was probably busy preparing for the inspection and everything else. There was still a whole week. He said that he had changed his mind. Everything was fine. He thought it would be better to ask someone else. He walked through the castle and thought that his brother would have an inspection of the training of the knightly order. While his brother was there, he would have a tour of the ducal house and possessions. It looked like there would also be a reception with invited aristocrats. Still, he needed to memorize faces and names properly. Service looked at him, called out and asked if he was going somewhere. He turned to him and said that he would go to Brother Gilliam. After that, he came to the research building, the Palace of Feathers. He looked at it in surprise and thought that the atmosphere here was completely different from the Summoners Guild. 2 guys passed by him and said that it really felt like an important royal facility because various studies were being conducted here. Rufus walked further. A knight recognized him, called him the third prince, and asked how he could help. He said that he came to meet with the first prince. The reason was that he needed to learn about the characteristics of key persons in the Duchy of Flirt. He agreed to report this, after which he returned and led him to the right office. As soon as he entered, Gilliam greeted him and said that he was glad that he came. Does he need information about the Duchy of Flirt? He agreed and said that he wanted to know before leaving. He said with a smile that he was very diligent. He should wait a little. He brought him a book and said that somewhere here there should be aristocrats associated with the ducal house. He was free to read it. He thanked him for it, looked at the book and thought, is this an encyclopedia of people? What a straightforward title. He opened the book and thought that there were even portraits, which was very convenient. He continued flipping through the book and saw a page with a girl, Flirt. He read the information about her and said that this meant there was a girl his age in this duchy. Gilliam agreed and said that there were also people his and Leonard's age in there. The protagonist was surprised by what he heard and thought that this meant that they were having children, adjusting to the birth of members of the royal family. Horrible. Aristocrats, that's something. Besides, the girl, the recent conversation with his father is starting to seem meaningful to him. Could she really be a candidate for his bride? He read that she had the skill of fire attribute magic and asked his brother if it was a very strong skill. He said that it was a skill that allowed one to use any fire attribute magic, but mastering all the spells would require tremendous training and it would take a lot of time. For the Duke's daughter, it would probably end with beginner level magic. He was surprised by what he heard and thought it would be a shame to stop at the beginner level with such a skill. He thanked his brother and said that thanks to him, he basically understood everything. Gilliam asked if he had finished yet. Having received a positive answer, he said with surprise that remembering everything after one reading was quite talented. How about combining working here with the position of the head of the Summoners Guild? He refused and thought that knowing him, he just wanted to work together with him. It was somehow awkward to leave without thanking him for his help. MC had an idea and said that he had a small gift for him as thanks for his concern. He summoned Tora-chan and asked her to give it to him. He took the item, handed it to his brother, and said that he asked to take it. He looked at what he handed over and asked, "Is it a watch?" He thought it was a wristwatch, reminiscent of a clock tower, but of an unfamiliar type. In this world, when people talked about watches, they usually meant large-scale structure like clock towers. Pocket watches were developed quite recently. Gilliam was very surprised by this and asked if he could accept such an amazing thing. When he received a positive answer, he said with an interested look that he wondered how it was arranged inside. He was a little worried about this, called him over, and said that, as he could see, it was a smaller version of a watch. There were many tiny gears tightly packed inside. If he opened it, the gears would probably scatter. He must handle it carefully. It was a one-of-a-kind, a very rare thing. He was very upset about this, and Rufus thought with a sly grin that although there were other types of wristwatches, his brother, with his skill as a scientist, needed to be told this. Otherwise, he really could take it apart. He left that place and thought that in any case, if he was happy, it was good. After that, a whole week passed in a flash, and the day of departure began. Gilliam stood before them and said with a smile that they must fulfill their duties properly. Milia stood next to him and said that they should be careful and have a safe journey. He stood next to Leonard and said that they were leaving. He approached the carriage, called his brother, and he said that he would ride a horse. He got into the carriage and said that with such space, everyone could be released. He summoned various creatures, and they said that the castle was getting further and further away from them. The master should see this. The protagonist looked out the window and said that he wondered what was beyond the castle. He thought that at that moment, overwhelmed by the delight of his first trip outside the capital, he still didn't know what was really beyond the castle walls.